All right, so let's jump right in. So if you haven't met me before, I'll briefly go through my story, which I went through last week. I started off this journey when I was 17 years old, and I got in a debilitating car accident and broke my femur. Doctors told me I wouldn't walk, and I was super motivated just to prove them wrong at first. So in 18 months, the middle photo, I actually ran for the first time. This is a photo my friend Kara took of me at 4 o'clock in the morning in Philadelphia, running for the first time. From that point forward, I ran every day until I walked on at Division I school, Temple University. The photo on the left is my leg. You see the break in there, you see the pole. And the photo on the right was me practicing like starts my senior year. This photo on the left is still in the medical room at Temple University because they're shocked that I was able to run with the screws and the poles and everything in my hip. So pretty interesting way to get into this industry, but I was this is extremely personal. So for me, it was all about at first proving everyone wrong, but then it was about, dang, if I could take this knowledge that I've learned through my process of rehabilitating myself to being able to run, to actually running fast, I could take some of that knowledge, put some science behind it, and help other people. So that's kind of the basis behind it. Oh, I'm gonna let a few more people in. 1 second. Okay, cool. So the next part of my journey deals with this man right here, Nazem Richardson. Nazem was my boxing coach from the time I was about 18, and really until like recently. He just passed away. But he taught me a lot about life, taught me a lot about boxing, and a lot about myself. One of my favorite quotes from him was, "Would you rather be a butcher or a surgeon in the ring?" So the first time I get to the ring, I'm like, I want to be a butcher. I want to chop things down. I want to, I want to attack, whatever. And I want it to be physical. So he's like, all right. So he let me fight a couple times, got my butt kicked in, whatever. And I realized, like, all right, I think he was saying be a surgeon. So then I asked him, I said, what does being a surgeon mean? And he was like, that's when you pick your shots. That's when you're technical. That's when you master your technique and stop worrying about the power, let the technique develop the power. So I took that into running. So when I first started running, for me, everything was about proper technique. So I got too technical. So everything I was doing, I was too focused on everything being perfect. When I went to coach, it was kind of the same thing. So I was coaching to a technical model, and I was basically defining a win as, okay, you got the technique right. So what happened was I saw a lot of athletes get the technique right, but the physiological side of their sprinting, like what they were actually physically developing, was underdeveloped. So what happened is I had a varying array of results. So I had some athletes that did really well, like really, really well, got to the Olympic professional level, and I had a few athletes that did really, really, really bad, that didn't perform. So I had to really go back and look and say, okay, why didn't this athlete perform? And what I found out, especially now through the research I'm doing now, is that there has to be a balance between your program. There has to be a balance between the physiological and technical changes athletes need to make. So I was heavily dominant, probably 70% on the technical side, maybe 30% on the physiological side. But now I pretty much flipped that. So number one, I want to develop the capacities and the power that you need to run fast. Simultaneously, I'm going to teach you technique. But the technique part of it, as we'll go into later on, is based around improving the power production, the force production into the ground. All right. So today we're going to go through what is acceleration, why do we train it, how do we train it. I'll show you my technical model, and then we'll go through a Q&A. The last session I went over a little bit. We had a lot of really good questions. So if you have a question, just drop it in the chat as we're going so you don't forget it. And if you get confused, just, write your question in there. My goal is to build this community out. So I want you guys to share this. I want you guys to tell friends, like, let's build this out. Because right now, like, I'm doing a lot of talking, but the way I want this in the future is, like, we might have breakout rooms, we might have discussions, and I want to learn from you guys too. So I want to build this community and really get people going, building discussions around this, because I think this is something that can change the world. It's relatively cheap. Everybody has access to it. If you're playing a sport that, involves running, then it's super important. So I really want to blow this thing up. All right, so let's dive into the science part. Just so you guys know, I'm going to be teaching middle school science this year. So this is like a major practicing step for me to be able to do this, because some of it will be on Zoom. But I'm really interested in the scientific aspects of things, even though in high school and college I was pretty bad at science. I couldn't understand why it was relative and important and all that, and now I do. So, all right, so it's rate of change in velocity. So our equation is this: acceleration equals v, which is our peak velocity, minus u, which is the initial value, divided by time. So for example, let's just plug easy numbers in. This is not a fast time. This is just regular. So let's take the peak velocity of 10 meters per second minus the initial value of 0 meters per second, divided by 5 seconds to get to that distance. So it took 5 seconds to go from 0 meters per second to 10 meters per second. So that would be 2 meters per second squared is the acceleration. Okay. Here is our list of guys right here. It's not in any order. You can see Nick Siemens, 429. He runs 22 miles per hour. This is pretty much everybody we have that runs 22 miles per hour. So all of their accelerations are pretty solid. The highest we have is 5.14. By the way, this is we work with a French company, so when they do the data on this, it's in commas, but the comma is a period, just in case you were wondering. But yeah, 5 seconds is super high. 6 is like out of this world, and apparently there's a 7 out there. Somebody's hit a 7. I've never seen it though. So these are just the values of A equals V minus U divided by T. Okay, really simple. Rate of change. This is what it looks like on our graph. So the A value you see is a high peak. So it happens a couple seconds in the run for acceleration. And then you see the velocity curve. So you see a peak that's a little bit slower to reach that peak velocity. So we hit your peak accel before you hit your peak velocity. It'll measure a little bit higher. Here's an example of this. So this is an example of the initial velocity not being 0. So initial velocity actually being maybe 10 miles per hour or so, and then push to 20 miles per hour or 22.
Brought in nicely by Yosefo. Hacked out the back. Alzori comes into the fray and keeps it alive. Lovely 1-2. And now Carl Niles in the red headband.
That ref wasn't that bad either. If you saw that, he was pretty close to him. So yeah, that's an initial velocity of, let's say, 4 or 5 meters per second, and then push up to 10 or 11 meters per second. So that's still an acceleration. It doesn't always have to be from 0. Okay, so question is, who are you picking on your fantasy team? So athlete A, they hit 22 miles per hour with an acceleration rate of 3.6 meters per second squared. Athlete B, 21.78 miles per hour with an acceleration rate of 4.6 meters per second. Ideally, I would choose athlete B for football or any acceleration-based sport. If it's track, maybe, I don't know, maybe athlete A. But for any sport that involves acceleration, short accelerations, under 20 yards, those types of things, you're going to want to go with the athlete that has a better acceleration rate than an athlete that just has a higher top end speed. Sometimes they go hand in hand, but sometimes they don't. Like guys like John Ross, they have a crazy high acceleration rate, but their velocity is, probably similar to a couple other guys in the league. You're not going to see them pop up on the highest next gen stats readings for GPS in the NFL. He'll be like top 10. So it doesn't necessarily mean if you have a high max velocity that you have a high acceleration, even though you could. Max velocity also doesn't happen in a vacuum. So what I mean by that is you're not dropped into a treadmill that's moving 22, 23 miles per hour. You have to actually build up to that velocity. So if you hit 22 miles per hour, that means your acceleration rate was high enough to get you to 22 miles per hour. But how fast does that happen will determine how effective it is. So if it happens, but it took you 7, 8, 9 seconds, then that's not an effective acceleration. You're not going to be able to access that in a game. It's not valuable. So what's valuable is hitting a high acceleration rate in the right amount of time. So what creates an effective acceleration? So now we know what it is. We know how to define it. We know the equation for it. So what actually creates it? So simple answer is force. Force into the ground. We call it ground reaction force. So ground reaction force in the right direction at the right time. So force in the wrong direction could be a deceleration, not an acceleration. At the right time means it's not happening like a bound where you're taking a ton of air time. It's happening quickly. It's happening fast. There's two ground reaction forces, horizontal and vertical. So put those together, that's your resultant force. That's your total force that an athlete is capable of producing. So in this metric here, you'll see F0, this is your total force. And then you'll see F0 norm. So what the difference between these two is F0 is just the total force that doesn't take into account body weight. F0 norm takes into account body weight. So it's normalized to body weight. So for example, if you look at Carson Stroman at the top, he's at 25.26. He's got an F0 norm of 14.4, super high. But then you see Kyle Sweet, he's got an F0 of 874, but still he's in the top 4 in the F0 norm at 12.5. The reason why is because he's got a lower body weight, so his overall force production is going to be different than a heavier athlete like Carson. But normalized per unit of body weight, so force per unit of body weight, he's going to be in the top 4. He's going to be pretty high. And similarly, like you see some of the girls are near the bottom, they're just lighter, but they're still producing high amounts of force. The ratio of force is kind of what we're going to get into for a little bit of time here. This is saying how much of that force, that total force, is horizontal and how much is vertical. So how much is actually projecting you forward versus up, if you want to think about it simply. So it's a ratio of horizontal force to vertical force at the beginning of the sprint. So in the initial pushes, how horizontal is that force? This is going to be a huge factor in determining an effective acceleration. At the beginning of the sprint, the ratio of force is much higher than towards the end. Towards max velocity, the ratio is primarily vertical. So as velocity increases, the ratio decreases. And we'll get into that next. So an effective ratio is depending on where you're at in the sprint. So in the beginning, high. Towards the end, it's going to be lower if we're just looking at horizontal. So here's our table, ratio of force max. You see the rankings. 55 is pretty good for Nick Dunn. He runs track. He'll be running at Oregon next year. But we've seen up to 70 for ratio of force. So some of our better accelerators or track guys will be closer to 70. But anything that's 55 to 65 is extremely, extremely elite for guys. And then for girls in the 40s is good. And you see girls, some of them are in the 50s. Like Kayla. Kayla runs 21 miles per hour. Jazz runs 20.5 miles per hour. She's at 50. Naya runs 20.6 miles per hour, and she's at 50 also. So you'll see some of the girls get pretty high. But anything above 45 is pretty good for the girls. Okay, so DRF. So I just kind of alluded to it. So DRF is a decrease in ratio of force. It measures how much it decreases and how fast it decreases per yard. So if your decrease in ratio of force is high, so let's say like above 10%, negative 10%, that means you're transitioning your horizontal force to vertical too fast. Poor transition. Just think poor transition. And the reason why we're talking like this is that max velocity, when max velocity is attained, acceleration is done. So everything preceding the peak velocity is an acceleration, technically. So when you ask how long is your acceleration phase, well, your acceleration phase is as long as it takes for you to reach your peak velocity. So it could be 60 meters, or it could be 10. But how fast it goes from horizontal to vertical will also determine some of that. So you'll see Caleb Lawson, who is the best technical sprinter that we have in this group, is at -7. That's very, very, very good. 8s is good. 9s is a little high. Anything 10 is not good. So you'll see athletes that reach that 10 number, it's way too high. So we try to get all of our athletes under 8 in the decreasing ratio of force. If you look at the demands of sports, though, so if you look at Usain Bolt, he needs to have a longer acceleration, so his force is going to be decreased over a longer period of time, which makes him technically more effective. But you look at a running back where they might need to get to a peak velocity or close to a peak velocity relatively fast within 5, 10, 20 yards. So a 20-yard play in football is like extremely long. So that's a huge play. So some of those running backs will have a poor DRF number and a super high ratio of force and force number, but that's the demand of their sport. So when these guys run the 40, you'll see a lot of running backs. You're like, why do you run a 4.6? You looked fast. Yeah, we got like a crazy acceleration, crazy ratio of force, but he hit his velocity. He was super early and couldn't hold on. So I'll talk a little bit about strategy for that stuff in a minute, but yeah, so there's a big difference there. Then if you look at slots versus wideouts, same thing as a running back. A slot would probably have to get up to speed a little bit faster, shorter, quicker. A wideout is going to need a little bit rangier speed, so longer speed. So they'll be able to accelerate for longer. And typically you see this in the NFL Combine when you see receivers run versus running backs versus corners. Like everybody has a different demand for their position, and you'll see a lot of similarities due to positions. So you'll see the strategies. So first one, Nick Dunn holds his acceleration for more than 5 seconds, or his max velocity for more than 5 seconds. When I say hold, within like 90%, so he's not like holding 100% for 5 seconds. That's impossible, but he's up there for a longer period of time. He has a super high acceleration rate. He just gets into his speed fast, and then he just kind of holds it up there. So it's an interesting way to run, but that's his signature. Then you see this athlete, I think this was Kayla. She has a longer a slower acceleration rate, but she gets her peak a little bit later, and then she touches that peak and then comes back down, but it's a super high peak. So completely different athlete, completely different way to train. So if we're running the 40, her strategy needs to be to accelerate every 10 yards until she finishes. For Nick, the first one, it would be accelerate, get up to top speed, and then try to decelerate less, which is honestly not my favorite way to train people, but it's, that's the way he runs. So to sum this up, an effective acceleration is a high ratio of force and a low decrease in ratio of force. Force times velocity equals power, P max. Max horizontal power, we determined last week, was one of the most influential metrics. So that's the metric that we looked at through the NFL Combine training process, where it was identifying the top picks and identifying guys that have been in the league for a long time. We looked at data from 2013 to 2018 through Jace and JB Marin, where they tracked those guys over time, and the guys at the higher PMAX numbers stayed in the league longer, got drafted higher, ended up making more money. So it's a very, very, very important metric. Already went over that. Okay, so how do we improve this? So this is the hardest thing, especially for coaches that don't have access to a ton of technology, trying to figure it out. They're probably already wondering, like, I can't afford this. I'm telling you right now, I definitely can't afford crazy amounts of equipment. There's simple field ways to do this, and we're going to go into that over the next couple of weeks of how to implement that. But you don't need a big budget at all. Like couple years ago, to talk about everything I'm talking about now would have been a couple $1 million of force plates into a track to figure out, what metrics matter. But now there's a lot simpler ways to do it. So if you look at studies, I'm gonna pull this one up here. You see that peak power is the red line. You're seeing that peak power happens about 1 second in the best runners in the world. So Usain Bolt hits it at 1 second. A less experienced sprinter is hitting it a little bit before, maybe 0.5 seconds. And then it's a downhill from there. So what this means is that if I just go out and run sprints, regular sprints, flat ground, it's almost impossible to improve my peak power, my P max. And the reason why is it's not enough exposure to that stimulus at peak power. So even if I run 10 sprints, it's going to fatigue me from a central nervous system, muscular system. It's going to fatigue me there, but I'm only going to be at that peak power for a little bit of time. So the best way that I can attack this is creating an environment that allows me to be around that peak power range for longer. And simple way to do that is resisted sleds. So they've been proven to improve max power by exposing athletes to peak power qualities for longer bouts of time. So what we'll do is you basically create an individual profile. So around 50% of their max velocity is usually where their peak power is, their P max is. So we'll determine what their optimal velocity is for them to train that peak power range. We'll use something called a load velocity profile. These are available, you can Google load velocity profile or Google JB Marin, and a lot of that stuff will pop up, and it's just an Excel sheet that we use, and we just plug it in, and it's very, very, very simple. And I'll show you how we track velocity later. But all you need to do is track velocity and time, have the athlete's body weight and height, and you're pretty much good to go. So we seek to expose the athletes to this maximum power stimulus for longer than normal. So like I said, if it's unweighted, it's only a second. So we use a resistive load that matches to about 50% max velocity decrement. So this is what it looks like. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because we'll get stuck here for a while because it's simple, but it takes a lot of explanation. Essentially what we're doing is plotting 25% body weight run, 50% body weight run, 75% body weight run. You don't have to do the 100%. JB Marin said it's not really necessary, so it's just on there. But then you get your max velocity, you determine your load. That's what you train on. So similar to what you do in the weight room, you do your max, then you work off a percentage of that max for a couple weeks, and then you change. It's the same thing. It's just in a horizontal way. Okay, so moving along. So that's one side of it, is the physiological adaptations. What we've seen is a massive increase in speed and power just from doing the physiological part. If we add the technical part, it's even better. So a lot of the technical parts that I take into coaching now come from a long coaching tree of Dan Paff down to Stu McMillan, down to Jonas Dodu. And there's a ton of people out there that have different philosophies, but simplest one that I look at is Jonas's KPIs. So projection, reactivity, and switching. So projection simply is, can you go forwards? Can you project your body forwards? Reactivity is, can you have reactive contacts on the ground, which is what I'm going to get into next. And switching is, can you set yourself up to deliver power into the ground? Can you set up your limbs so that you attack the ground in the right way to produce power and projection and everything else? So most of our technical goals are centered around that, and centered around improving the ground time, the air time, and the stride lane. So it'll look like this. So we'll look at, for example, acceleration. We might look at just 2 steps, and we'll analyze what is the ground time, what is the air time, and see the relationship. So look in the top right, we look at, is the air time growing taller and the ground time getting smaller? So is there more air time as each step goes? And is there less ground time as each step goes? So you'll see this in acceleration. You'll see the red will be pretty small. Max velocity, it'll be flipped. Next box on the left, step length. You'll see step length grow every step. So simple way to look at it is the ground time decreasing and the air time increasing? Is the step length increasing? Check those boxes. If you see anything off, then you know to look at the video to determine, okay, what's actually going on. So if I look at my 3-point, or let's say my first step, and I see there's a big discrepancy in stride length or ground contacts, then I'll go look at the video and determine, okay, you know, he's over rotating, he's not projecting, he's kicking. Like, then I'll go look at the video. But generally, I try to keep the bias out of it until the last minute and just determine what is the program that I'm gonna set this on, and then start building up the technical stuff. Okay. Results from this, we saw a 0.328 second change in our athletes this year, which is a big increase from last year. We had fewer guys, but I was able to really do this data, and it was relatively easy. Like, we spent a little bit of time per day doing the data sheets. The most time that we spent was really figuring out what was important. But once we figured it out, we saw a huge increase. One thing that we're doing now is we're integrating this into our app. This is the app here. So what we'll do is, when you get an athlete, we test them. We run them through a force velocity profile, which gives me their force, their velocity, their power, the ratio of force, all of that. Then what we do is we actually run it through our algorithm, and it scores each athlete. So athletes are being scored against our database, which includes first graders all the way up to gold medalists in the Olympics. And then it's also ranking them against their peers. So like if they're on a team, they're able to see, okay, this is where I rank against my my homies on my team or my position. So this automatically populates in their app. And then our algorithm is actually getting stronger and stronger the more people we test. So that's why we're super motivated right now to test more people and get out and you know, go through all this with athletes. And this is how it looks: 40-yard time, max miles per hour, 10 split, and the algorithm will appear there. Let me see how I'm doing on time right now. Oh, we got 42 people. All right, so 39 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to go through some of our technical model stuff real quick, and then I might leave some of that to next week. So we have a good amount of time to go through questions. And then I'm going to go through and actually break down a video. We're just going to look at it real quick, compare and contrast. Okay, so this is a force line that this is all technical stuff. So this is something that we'll do after an athlete's tested on the physiological profile. We want to see, do they add up to our technical model? So first thing is looking at from any stance. So from 3-point, kneeling, standing, are they able to produce horizontal force? But does it visually connect? Are they able to extend? Are they able to get their torso out? Are they able to project? So let's look. Great projection. He projects his torso forward, what Jonas calls torso torpedo. His great hip extension. You'll see like a little bit of non-knee extension. That's good. We don't want too much knee extension. We don't want to overdo knee extension.
Coach, sorry to interrupt you. We can't see your screen.
Oh, okay. 1 second. Let me know when you can see it. Can you guys see it?
Yeah. Good to go.
All right, sweet. Okay, so let me go back to that video. Sorry, guys. So you'll see projection, his torso projects forward, his hip extends, not too much knee extension, and he's setting himself up for a really good switch. So you see there's space under his foot for him to attack back. And then from here, he's just thinking about switching. So in the projection, we look at the posture. So the post is from the hip to the shoulder. I always talk about projecting your post forward. Can you get your post forward? Center of mass is COM. So can you get your center of mass out in front of where your lower body is, lower half? Triple extension, I'm not crazy about that word, but like you do want to get triple extension, the hip, the knee, and some of the ankle. If you over rotate the ankle, so like too much plantar flex, it's going to rob you. So if you look at the ankle right now and the foot should be vertical, up and down when it finishes the toe off. So here's a good example. This is Carlin Isles coming out the blocks. He's got a great ratio of force, great torso projection, and then you'll see his line of power, his long axis from his heel to his head gradually comes up and starts off pretty well. You'll see less knee extension each step. Cool. Leg action, we talk about large ranges of motion, parallel lines between the shin and the body, or really the lower body. So this back leg, you'll see the angle of the long axis, the shin should match that. And then we talk about piston. So really piston means you take that front shank, that front knee to ankle, and you drive it back towards the ground. It's almost land behind the center of gravity. So I'll show you that in the video. Low heel recovery, I'm not a big fan of that. Like this is an old presentation. I am a big fan of low heel recovery, but I try not to overcoach that. So I think if an athlete pushes correctly and has a good ratio of force, has good power, they're automatically going to have low heel recovery. But if you try to overcoach it, sometimes you'll see athletes like sweep their toe or drive it too low. Don't really try to focus on anything distal. So like proximal being the hip, distal being below the hip. I try to focus on everything proximal to the hip. And if they switch correctly, they'll get that. So you'll see this, his shin angle starts to match up to his body angle. First 7 steps, this will happen. After that, torso still stays pretty low in comparison to the shin. The shin goes vertical. You'll see it attack behind his hip on the first step, under his hip on the second, and then he's just attacking down. Here's Rossi. Great projection, great extension. Attacks back, switches his leg through. This is Kenny Hill. This is day 1. He's a quarterback from TCU. He hates me for showing this video because now he's a coach and all the athletes that he recruits see this. But this is day 1. He ran a 4.9. So we'll look to see some of the things that he did wrong here. So poor ratio of force, poor decrease in ratio of force, popped right up. There's a million things here. You'll see this the night before his pro day. His pro day, he ran a 4.61, down from a 4.91, day 1. And you'll see him project and attack back pretty well here. Same thing here, Tyree Robinson, he ran a 4.47. This is the night before pro day at Oregon. He's got a great projection angle and attacks back extremely well. So here's an example of John Ross with a great ratio of force, great acceleration DRF, great acceleration rate in comparison to Odell and Julio, who accelerate very quickly up to top speed. And then once they hit top speed, they kind of just maintain. So you'll see John Ross, he'll accelerate almost to the finish line, whereas Odell and Julio aren't able to do that.
Is this a record at 4.22?
They should have put Rich Eisen in this one.
Oh, please no.
That'd
I would be off
fun.
the screen by now. Yeah, that does look 2/100ths of a second.
Okay, moving along. This is a great ratio of force example. Plus, technically, he's attacking back, producing a ton of power on each step.
Impressive number. A 270-pound man running 4.47 unofficially is more impressive to me than a 200-pounder running 4.24. That's crazy right there. That's just flat out crazy.
Mariota and Winston.
Same thing here, Mariota
Thankfully
versus
for Winston, it's not nearly as bad as that.
Mariota accelerate all the way
It's
through.
pretty close. Come on, look at
The
that.
velocity, Winston had a terrible.
It was 5 yards
ratio
at
of
30.
force.
Come on,
That
man.
He's not able to even accelerate
Some
up
neat
to top
simulcams to
speed.
show you, Mike, and the folks.
Greedy Williams ran a 4.37, currently with the Browns, drafted second round. The best ratio of force I've seen, 71.5, I think. And you'll see it reflect in his contacts in the power that he creates in the ground. Look at the projection, look at the reactivity on the ground to project his body forward. All right. Let's move to, we'll go through like a couple of videos and then I want to hop in those questions. Joey, if you're on this, I'm sorry for showing your video. So first, let's look at it from a technical lens. Great push. Once he gets the toe off, you'll notice there's not a lot of space under his foot here, unless he was just to attack back. But what happens is his foot keeps traveling forward, and by the time he hits the ground, it's a braking action. So what you want to see here is we talked about those parallel lines. So that angle and that angle should be right, should be the same. And what he wants to do is he wants to attack this leg this way. Instead, he lets it fall here, and it becomes a break on contact. Okay. Then what happens is as he's braking, notice that this foot is extremely far behind. This leg has to stay on the ground until this one comes forward, right? So he's taking so long to come around that his foot's just staying on the ground, and then he's repeating the same step. Break, coming around. So he projects really well, but he's not reactive because he's not hitting back and he's not switching. So the pattern that he set from this step here is going to carry out and play itself out over the rest of his run. Okay, so I'll show you something that's exact opposite. This is Austin Eckler from the Chargers. Let's see if I can find it. Elijah Austin, there we go. So watch him project his upper body. Now this is where it gets pretty cool. Watch him attack this leg back. See what's happening in the air? He's created so much power horizontally that he has enough time to attack back. So by the time his foot hits, it's behind his hip. Okay, so that's step one. Then step two, let's see what happens. Not bad. Could be better. Okay, he has an effective acceleration, has a super high velocity. Not a bad run. A couple things to fix there, but not terrible. Let's look at one more. Hits back, hits back, hits back. So coming from 0 velocity to a higher velocity, this initial these two pushes here are the most important. Sets the pattern, sets him up for good acceleration, gets him into velocity a little bit faster. All right, sweet. That was almost an hour. Sorry, guys. Let's go through some questions. One second, I'll pull these questions up. Okay, so what questions you guys have? So AMAX numbers are measured from start to first step. So the AMAX numbers are measured from a 0 velocity to the highest velocity. So AMAX is really just it's not in miles per hour, it's meters per second squared. So it's measured from the first initial movement to whatever the peak velocity is. So let's say the peak velocity is 20 miles per hour. We're looking at how long does that take, and then we're looking at whatever the start velocity is. Whatever the peak velocity is minus the start velocity divided by the time. Let's see, what other questions do you have? How many reps do you do weighted sprints? So I do generally 4, max 6, and a total of like maybe 8 a week. So maybe 8, 4 heavy, 4 lighter. And what I'll do is I'll do them at 20 yards. So at 50%, it could take 5 seconds against that velocity decrement. So yeah, about 20 to 25 yards. As it gets lighter, I tend to go a little bit further. Can you refresh what switching is? Yeah, so switching, think about a switch from the hip. So initiating movement closer to the hip rather than thinking about driving the foot down or thinking about using the hip musculature, so the flexor and extensors in the hip to attack the ground. You'll see if somebody switches correctly, the knees are side by side on contact. So when the foot hits the ground, opposite foot hits the ground, you'll see the knees almost side by side or a little bit ahead if they switch correctly. If they don't switch correctly, it looks like that first run where the guy had his leg all the way behind him. It took a while to come back around. How do I decide between sled pushes, sled drags, and hills? No, that's like an amazing question. Number one is access. Like, what do you have? Sled pushes, the reason why I don't prioritize them over sled pulls, even though I do prioritize them, sled pushes does not force the athlete to control their upper body weight. So their upper body is 50.5% of their, 50 to 55% of their total body weight. And being able to control that is a skill. And learning how to do that through acceleration is important. So if you have them hold a sled and push it, their body weight is being supported by those pulls. So the benefit of the push sled is that I can have an athlete learn and create context around where their torso should be, and maybe only focus on their lower body, their lower half. Do the same thing sometimes with the shoulder harness instead of a waist harness. So I would say sleds for context. I would say pull sleds for actual loading. And then hills could be a conditioning stimulus. It could be a teaching, like, for example, we always do higher velocity runs, maybe starting out the first phase. They start out on a hill to build capacity or to build stiffness, those types of things. So yeah, I hope that answered that question. What do you say lighter, referring to weighted sprints? How much lighter based off weight or velocity? I used to go like 10 to 15% body weight sled runs. But then I realized like all the athletes I had do that were pretty much the same mold or, similar athletes. So now I use velocity decrement. And once I create their profile, I go usually like 10 to 20% velocity decrement for a weighted run for a max velocity sled. So it's usually just a potentiation thing. So we want them to always think push horizontal, push horizontal, push horizontal, even as they get faster in velocity. So it might be we're doing fly runs, but I might start them out on a sled to get them thinking that, to create context, and then push them to a fly run. What are some cues or drills used to teach junior athletes to drive their leg back behind them? So it could be really simple. Like, I think when you put an athlete on a sled, they're going to learn how to do that, because the only way to go forward is to hit back. So create context around some of the junior athletes. It's less about creating maximal power, more about context. You could do wall drills in a simple way. Try to use cueing as the last resort. So just put them in the environment, and then you could cue them just to fix their environment until they start to get the patterns. With that guy who had the good first step, he had a bit of plantar flexion before contact. Is that a result of him trying to actively push down and back? What are your thoughts regarding casting the foot prior to contact? Yeah, Austin does plantar flex, and it's like you'll see a lot of the guys that take their ankles and stuff. They like to try to run on their toes, and yeah, it's not ideal. So I mean, there's some of that takes a long time to coach out of athletes. But yeah, my thoughts regarding casting the foot prior to contact, like, we try to eliminate it, but it just comes with time. Like, we don't rush it. We do a ton of drills, foot and ankle drills in the beginning of sessions. We go to complete fatigue on foot and ankle if we do it after a session. Plyos, trying to get we do flat foot contact drills, like walking drills and things like that. So yeah, we try to provide as much context, but it's not gonna, like, as you see, none of those guys were perfect, and they run extremely well. You stated one heavier, one lighter weighted sled session. By going lighter, you are now working outside of that Pmax zone of 50%. Yeah, you are. So you are working out of the peak power, the Pmax zone, but you could be working on the middle part of the run. So velocity, working on your DRF. So working on improving your acceleration is not just the start. Ratio of force will be greatly increased by working the Pmax, but some of those later parts of the run, 20 and 30 yards in, are lighter sleds would help that. How does accelerating up a hill train efficient acceleration patterns? It's you can't really run wrong on a hill. I mean, I guess you can, but if you cast out, or if you have those bad habits that you have on flat ground, you're not going to get up the hill as fast. So just providing that little slope is going to help an athlete think push, think attack. So sometimes we do conditioning on a hill. Like, they'll do more reps on a hill because it's lower velocity. It's slower, so you can teach a little bit better. So what exercises in the weight room? I'll have that'll be a whole other talk. So I'll bring somebody on that is a weight room specialist. But if you're talking about force, creating vertical force is important, and you can translate that to horizontal. So anything within the weight room that develops that, as far as like squat, clean, deadlift, you can do a force velocity profile in the weight room too. So we'll get into that in a couple weeks. What is my total volume limit for an acceleration session? It depends. So how much can they handle? Maybe 300 yards total, but I don't think I've ever gone that high. So when I look at GPS data, I look at speed zones. So how much speed do they have between 18 and 24 miles per hour? How much do they have between 4 and 18? I look at those zones. So in those high zones on acceleration day, it's pretty low, maybe 50 or less, probably a lot less actually. On a acceleration day. On a max velocity day, it'll probably be in that zone of 18 to 24, it'll probably be about 100. So we get up there, but it's not a ton at all. What is my balance between weights in the gym and sprinting during the week and in the off season, in season? And yes, it's available in the app now. I don't have the force velocity stuff in there yet, but it's being inputted. We'll find out Monday more about that. So my balance between the weights in the gym and sprinting, we like to pair up same central nervous system demands on the same day, similar to Charlie Francis. But like I said, we'll probably bring on Chad Wesley Smith or a couple other strength guys that really specialize in this stuff, because I mean they're much better than I am at it. So I'll try to bring them in. But we try to do the same demands on the same day. So like an acceleration day, we're still going to do lower body. A tempo day, we'll probably do upper body. It just depends on demands, like in season versus off season. It's probably a whole other talk, honestly. Other drills commonly accepted, concepts you've gotten away from over time, and why. That's a brilliant thing. So I used to build my sessions based on technical models. So I do my vertical drills, I do my horizontal drills, I do my resisted runs, whatever. And then by the time I got to the free runs, they were like, dude, we're tired. So kind of switched the model around. Immediately after the warm-up, I do 2 or 3 like higher velocity runs. 2 or 3. Like if they're learning, it might be a dribble, so they might build into it to velocity. But as they get more advanced, it might be 2 or 3 runs all out, like 95%. And we wear the GPS, so we're able to track. And then we get into some of the technical stuff and resisted stuff. But we want to see like what's the output today. So I switched my whole schedule around to prioritize the run first. Were the force profiles rather? Oh yeah, so the force profiles that I had on there were fusion, but we've done it multiple ways. We've done it GPS. We've done it from video. If the person wasn't there in person, we've done it from fusion. So yeah, you don't need like fusion's great if you can afford it. I can't. Like, I don't know how we did, but there's other ways to do that for sure. My name of the app, it's Spellman Performance. If you just go to my Instagram, hit the link in my bio, and then hit the app, it's right there. Oh, it's a good one. So how have improvements in acceleration out of 3-point and stationary starts transferred to positional starts and or re-acceleration after change of direction on field and court? That's an amazing question, Amir. Thank you. Honestly, so it comes down to specificity. So at the beginning of the year, you're going to work on your more general things. Like you might do a 3-point start, even for a basketball player, just because, like, I don't know, like because we got time, we got context. So as you get more advanced and as you get closer, you get more specific to what the athlete needs. So you're going to develop those qualities too. So in rugby, for example, it's very rare they're at a static start. So we practice static starts, but after a while, we kind of move away from it and just we get to more specific things, you know? So we kind of look at the demands of the sport, what do they need, and then kind of work backwards from there and build the program up until the time they report to camp. So I do mostly off season. So up until they report to camp, I'm trying to build them into the more specific stuff. We do see like change of direction stuff. We do see it's the same principles. Like, I mean, we work change of direction too. Like, I just don't. I try to stay in my lane. So like, I have other people that do more change of direction that are masters at it. So I'll bring them on here to talk about that. Love to hear more on complexes and cues to bring context to proper projection, reactivity, and switching. Also to promote pushing versus landing. Awesome. Yeah, I can do that. So there's a million things. We'll have like, maybe I'll bring Jonas. You guys know Jonas? I'll bring Jonas on and let him talk about some of the technical things that he sees. He's a wizard. So let's go 2 more questions. Yeah, you can come. Come to the 11:30. Come to the 11:30 for sure. 11:30 is a good group, actually. What sport do you play? Okay, bet. Yeah, come to 11:30. All right, one more question. No more questions? All right, guys. Well, I appreciate you. Oh, thoughts on more upright acceleration. What do you mean by that? Like, what is the upright acceleration? Does that mean like going from a moving, like you're standing? Oh, okay, not starting from. So if you're doing a start, I mean, I don't know why you would want to start. Oh, from a jog. Yeah, so like I said, we build a pattern from a very controlled environment, like a static environment, and then you build towards more specificity. So let's say we're working, I'll get into like more technical stuff next week, but let's say we're doing a drill called a 4-step acceleration drill. We'll do it from a kneeling, then a standing, then a jog into it. So we're trying to practice the same things. Like, how do you project when you're already moving? How do you position your body? It's the same concepts. It just happens from a different place. McLeod GPS. It's yeah, it is a monthly subscription. I would recommend it. And here's like, I'm not a salesman at all, and like doesn't benefit me at all, to be honest. But we've just worked with them to integrate some new technology into it. So like working with the force velocity stuff and getting some numbers on there. They're super amazing to work with. I just call them, WhatsApp them, and we've made some pretty big jumps in GPS tracking. So I definitely would recommend them. I don't know, like Stat Sports is all, they're all good now. Like Catapult, Stat Sports, McLeod. I just have a better relationship with McLeod. I will be going over lateral movements and drills and mechanics for sure. For sure. Maybe this is week 2, probably week 4. All right, guys. Well, if you have any other questions, just hit me, DM, text, email, whatever. Appreciate you guys. I'll put this on YouTube too if you missed it.